Hello everybody. So today I'm going to be cutting some rafters for my timber frame carport project, and I thought this was worth doing a video on. It's cutting rafters is a good skill to have, and there's a lot of ways to do it. The very typical way a lot of carpenters do is they have kind of a cookbook formula they'll follow to size and cut rafters. And a lot of the cookbook formulas in carpentry, they originated because a lot of carpenters may not have had good math skills, or maybe they didn't even have an education, and so a lot of those cookbook formulas came about so that people could um, you know size and cut rafters without knowing too much math. And I've been doing carpentry since about the age of 8. I started working in my dad's building business at a very young age, and so back when I started doing this stuff, I didn't have those math skills either, and so all I knew back then were those cookbook formulas. But what I found as I got older and learned geometry and math skills, uh, I much prefer to come through and calculate things on paper, just using basic geometry. And I think this gives a deeper understanding of, how you size and cut the rafter. Um, Unlike a cookbook formula, if you have to deal with a problem or change or, just adjust something on the fly, being able to do your own calculations makes a big difference. It means you can adapt and you can handle unique situations that a cookbook formula may not address. And so I'm going to briefly just kind of point out how these calculations work. I'm not going to go into too much detail. The key of all of this, though, is just to realize that the calculations are based around this concept of similar triangles. And that starts with you choosing a roof slope. And in this case, my roof is going to have a 7/12 pitch. And so that's the 7/12 triangle. And every other triangle I draw on this paper is going to have the same ratio of sides and hypotenuse as that 7/12. And so knowing that, that's really the only key concept here. If you understand similar triangles, then the rest is real simple. And so I just start by sketching out my gable, if you want to call that a horizontal or a header beam across the gable, and then one of the rafters coming down. And the first triangle here in the middle, that's kind of the key one. And here, I have a 75 3/4 inch dimension from the center of the gable, or basically that ridge, out to the inside edge of my header beam on the eave wall. And so the first triangle I draw is a 7/12 based on that very key and important dimension. And so knowing that, or I can go to the structure and measure that if I don't have blueprints, I then calculate this height. That's 7/12 of that, and that ends up being 44 3/16. And then you can use Pythagorean theorem to calculate the hypotenuse. And that's kind of our first step in figuring out where to make our bird's mouth cut. That gives us the distance from over here down to where that cut starts. And then the bird's mouth, well, that's another 7/12 triangle. And down here, I just, again, using a 7/12 ratio, calculate the dimensions on that bird's mouth cut. And so that helps you work out, the size of that cut, and you can mark it off on your board. And it turns out you really only need to mark any 2 of those dimensions. And when you hold up a carpenter square to those points you marked, you should see that 3rd dimension come out true, because the carpenter square is giving you the 90-degree angle. And so that's always a nice little check. And then the last thing, if you know your horizontal overhang, in my case it's a little over 21.5 inches, then here again is another 7/12 triangle, and you can calculate this distance here and know where you're going to make your tail cut. Now you notice this is a little bit of an odd dimension. What I actually did here in this project was I kind of worked backwards. I knew I was going to be working with 10-foot sheets of metal roofing, and I wanted to have a 3-inch overhang of that metal past that rafter tail, and which means the top of the rafter had to be 117. And so I worked backwards that way, and then that told me that's what my overhang was going to be horizontally, and it works out to 25 inches on hypotenuse. But you can do that a couple different ways. Some people, will go say, I want a 12-inch overhang, or I want an 18-inch overhang. I tend to try and work with the available metal roofing sizes I can get. Occasionally, there's a project where I can't use an off-the-shelf metal panel size. One in particular I'm thinking of was a boathouse roof. We had to set the width of that based on where the pilings were driven. There wasn't any sense to that width. I think it had originally been sized to fit somebody's boat. And for that one, I had to order really oddball metal panels cut to like 9 foot 4 inches. But in this case, I'm working with 10-foot panels. I wanted a 3-inch overhang, and I worked backwards to tell me what my horizontal overhang was going to be for the rafter tail. So that's really the gist of marking out your rafters for cutting. And again, I just think, if you can do this with very simple math, it gives you a better understanding of how this all works out. And if something doesn't make sense, you can come back and check your work. If you use the Carpenter's cookbook formula and something doesn't work out, you can't really determine what went wrong. You're just looking at a table with numbers or a chart, and it doesn't help you, figure things out. One last thing I want to note here before we start cutting some wood is that most of my main dimensions on the structure are, like 75 3/4. That's my half dimension from the center to the inside of that header beam. Most of my dimensions when I do a building, they're rounded to about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch. I try and keep things simple. But when I run through this math with a calculator, I use just a regular, decimal calculator, usually the one on my iPhone. And for that, I carry things out to about 3 decimal places. And then when I'm done and ready to cut wood, I'll round these to the nearest 1/16 of an inch to make the cut. You can buy a Carpenter's calculator that will do all your calculations, rounding everything to 1/16 of an inch. Some people like that. I don't like those calculators because if you're doing combined calculations, you're accurate to 1/16 of an inch for one calculation. Then by the time you get down to the 3rd, 4th calculation, you may have accumulated some round off error, and your final result, you could be off by, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch just because you've accumulated error. So I really don't see the need to get one of those Carpenter's calculators that works in 1/16. I say use your plain old handy digital decimal calculator, and carry 3 decimal places through, and then right before you cut, round those numbers to a 1/16, and you should be good. So that's it for kind of the basics here. Next, I'm going to show some of the rafters and some of the cutting. Okay, so here's my template rafter that I just cut, and here's the ridge end, and the bird's mouth, and then the tail cut. And I've just carried this over to the building frame and put it up in place and made sure it fit right, and everything looked good. And so that was a good sanity check of the calculations and also the real world fit. And the next thing I'm going to do, I've transferred, what I did was I laid this template on top of one of my Gable Rafters. And for the Gable Rafters, so for most of the all the middle rafters, I'm using a 2x6. For the Gable Rafters, I'm using a 2x8. It just gives a nicer look, a more finished look, kind of a beefier look on the ends where you see things. So I've taken my template and I've laid it on top of this 2x8 and lined up on the top edge, and I've traced where the ridge cut needs to be. I've come down and traced where the bird's mouth is going to need to be, and then the tail cut. And so I'm going to set up, finish these markings, extend them, and then come through and make those cuts next. Okay, so there's the one of the 2x8 Gable Rafters. You notice the bird's mouth for this is much deeper just because it's a wider board. But this dimension here is going to be identical to what's on all the other typical 2x6 Rafters. Okay, so there's our completed gable end set of rafters. I added those two struts in the middle, just mainly those are ornamental, and I'm most likely going to put some sort of a medallion up at the peak there, but that'll come much later when I get into the trim work. But we got a real nice fit with the bird's mouth. We're up tight against the header beam, so that came out nice and clean. Now this is green lumber, so I'm sure this is going to change. It probably won't look as good in a few months, but right now it looks nice and tight. The only thing left to do is to come in and trim off the posts flush with that rafter on both ends, but actually I'm gonna have to be doing that for all the posts. The way I have the rafters spaced out, the ones that are near a post are going to actually attach to the side of the post, and that improves your structural integrity quite a bit. And so I'll wait until I have all the rafters up, and then I can come back in probably with a chainsaw and just cut those posts off so that they're flush with the rafters. So at this point I need to duplicate this on the back or the rear gable. I am at this point I'm out of lumber though, so I'm actually gonna have to go cut down some trees tomorrow and crank out, I guess I need a couple 2x8s 10 feet long, and then I'll probably cut trees down so I can make all the rafters. I think I counted I need about 21 or 20 or 22 2x6 rafters, so I'm gonna try and fell enough trees tomorrow to complete all the rafters and start working on those next. I'll probably put up another video once I get going with the rafters. I haven't decided whether I'm going to pre-assemble them into truss units and lift them up into place, or put up a non-structural ridge board that I can nail the rafters to. It really just depends on convenience and how heavy and wet that lumber is, and how easy or how hard it is to work with, as to which way I go with that. And most likely I'm gonna have to build some sort of walk board or staging to deal with the rafters in the middle, because I really can't be working off the tractor work platform for those ones in the middle, at least not as efficiently. And you notice today I had quite a rig up with a ladder to get to the platform, and then a ladder on top of the platform. My criteria for safety is this arrangement better than trying to get up there with one ladder? If it is, then I call that safe enough, and I guess you might call that redneck down here in Virginia, but I'm from New England, so we'd probably call that Yankee ingenuity. I guess it's one and the same thing, but you know, I do use the tractor quite a bit to get me up to a working height when it's safer than using a ladder. But when I have to start rigging up multiple ladders, that's when I start to think to myself, well, this is getting borderline dumb. And so definitely for those middle rafters, I'm going to be putting up some sort of staging or walkboard, or maybe a walkboard that I can slide down the headers and go to each rafter unit. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching.